So far, we've presented evidence of a 4-shot assassination sequence with 3 shots fired from the Texas Schoolbook Depository, plus the AR-15 accident. This scenario accounts for Kennedy and Connolly being struck by separate shots, plus all their wounds, plus the missed shot that caused James Taig's minor wounds. It accounts for all the evidence we've so far discussed, including the king-size fragment that fell out of Kennedy's back during the autopsy, plus the bullet nose and tail fragments found in the front of the limousine, plus the dent in the chrome strip at the top of the windshield. And, of course, the evidence for 2 headshots, one from the shooter's window, plus the AR-15 accident. We've presented accounts by witnesses who reported the possibility of more than 3 shots, who reported 4 shots, or, as in one case that we showed, 3 or 4 shots that she was sure of, leaving open the possibility of more than 3 or 4 shots that she was less sure of. And we explained why those who reported only 3 shots would have been likely to under-report the actual number of shots. In short, we presented a 4-shot scenario that accounts for all the human victims of the assassination and all their wounds, and fits with many witness accounts of what happened. The AR-15 accident, combined with our first-shot single bullet theory, gives a plausible explanation for all of this, and all the evidence of a massive cover-up, including alterations to the Zapruder film, as well as other assassination films and photographs, and alterations to the autopsy evidence. Our witness accounts put the president's limousine in these approximate positions at the time of each of our 4 shots. But actually, we still have a problem, because there are a number of witnesses who put a shot between the intersection of Elm and Houston and the location of the limousine in the Mary Moorman photograph. A shot about simultaneous with the Altgens 6 photograph. Associated Press photographer James Ike Altgens himself was one of those witnesses. Altgens told the Warren Commission that he took his picture simultaneously with the sound of a shot, although the Warren Commission told Altgens something different.
As I was getting ready to make some pictures, I heard this noise. I thought it was a firecracker explosion. I just went ahead and made the picture, which shows the president right after he was struck by a bullet, struck in the neck, the first shot. And this was a picture that the Warren report later fixed as being made 2 seconds after the shot was fired.
2 seconds after the forehead shot might be about right, given what we can see in this picture. Kennedy is already in that decorticate posture or Lazarus sign position, and Jackie already has her hands on his arm. But Altgens himself originally thought his picture was simultaneous with a shot, what he thought was the first shot. We're not dismissing his belief that he heard a shot at the same time he took his picture, because others have placed a shot with the limousine in about this location as well. But it wasn't the first shot, the forehead shot. Altgens simply was not paying attention to the actual first shot, and he missed the moonwalking bear. In this case, we have a pretty good idea of why Altgens missed the actual first shot. Before Altgens took his famous number 6 photograph, he had run to that location from where he had just taken this picture, the Altgens 5 photograph, at the corner of Main and Houston. Starting from the positions of Altgens and the limousine when the Altgens 5 picture was taken, as the limousine proceeded down Houston Street to make its left-hand turn, Altgens was busy grabbing his gear bag, cutting across the grass, depositing his gear bag, winding his camera for the next picture. His mind was on what he was doing. He missed the moonwalking bear, the shot that had been fired 2 seconds before he took his photo. And this gives one specific example of how a bystander did not report the first shot. If we place the limousine on Elm Street in the Altgens 6 photograph, we get something like this. Altgens wasn't mistaken about hearing a shot as he was taking his famous picture, because other bystanders heard a shot when the limousine was in about that same location. Patricia Ann Lawrence, later Donaldson, placed the limousine for her first shot about where it was in the Altgens photograph.
This is approximately where the car was in this position when I heard the first shot. And when I heard the first shot fired, I turned to my left and looked up at the building. I knew it came from over my head and from that building. And then I turned back around, and there was 2 shots rapidly, and I saw that Kennedy was hit.
And there was more time between the first and second shot?
Oh, yes. The first shot, and there was a pause, and then there was bam, bam.
We don't actually think the Altgens 6 shot came from the schoolbook depository window, but we do have 2 possible explanations for why she thought it did. First, she may have been confusing the sources of 2 different shots, combining them into one. In fact, to some extent, we do think that happened, not registering the first shot that came from the window because she thought it was a firecracker, or because it was partly masked by the crowd noises, whatever. And certainly she was not expecting an assassination, so hearing one sound come from the window might have influenced her perception that the next sound also came from that window. But another reason she may have perceived this sound as coming from behind her is an acoustic perception phenomenon called front-back reversal. That is, humans usually have a great sense of determining right versus left based on the brain's uncanny ability to determine which ear picks up a sound first. However, determining front and back is much more problematic, and people will often perceive a sound that originated from in front of them to have originated from behind. In Patricia Lawrence Donaldson's case, we think that she made a front-back reversal acoustic misperception. The shot actually came from in front of her on the left side, not behind her on the left side. But her placement of the president's car at the time of the Altgens 6 shot is correct. Although having the limousine parked at that spot during her interview may have contributed to a misinformation effect as to its location for the actual first shot, our forehead shot. This is her apparent shot sequence. Patricia Ann Lawrence Donaldson's apparent obliviousness of the Mormon photo Connolly shot may have been another mental blending of shots, undoubtedly aided by the distraction and confusion of bystanders beginning to realize there was a problem, or possibly the misperception of the Connolly shot as an echo, especially given the misinformation that only 3 shots were fired. We're not sure. But she does seem to have missed that one altogether, much as Mary Mormon seems to have missed any shots prior to taking her picture. Mary Woodward, later Pillsworth, was a reporter for the women's news section of the Dallas Morning News. She has been identified as this woman in the Altgens 6 photograph. She's smiling, apparently unaware that the president is already in distress. In fact, she says in one of her accounts that she wasn't even aware of any problems until the headshot when the limousine was farther down the road. We place her position in Dealey Plaza about here, not far from the concrete pillar we can see in Altgens 6. She said this.
And they were kind of talking amongst themselves in the car. And I yelled out, "Please look this way," because I wanted to see Jackie Kennedy. "Please look this way." And they did look at us and waved, and I think we're the last people they waved to.
We believe she misinterpreted Kennedy's head drop and slump and Governor Connolly's turning to try to see him, which gave her the impression that they were talking amongst themselves. Then she misinterpreted Kennedy's movement into the decorticate posture position as a wave. Jackie may have waved as she turned to her husband before fully realizing that he had been shot. Or maybe Jackie was raising her hand to put on her husband's shoulders, and Woodward misinterpreted that motion as a wave. Woodward's misinterpretation is similar to the way that Jean Hill initially thought JFK and Jackie were looking down at a little dog between them on the seat, later realizing that there was no dog but only white flowers, or possibly a stuffed animal nicknamed Lamb Chop after the Sherry Lewis puppet by some assassination researchers. But again, Woodward didn't think Kennedy was injured at all until she saw him struck in the head with her next shot, the first shot of the double bang, the AR-15 shot. This is what Mary Woodward Pillsworth seems to have heard. Interestingly, Woodward originally thought that the shots came from her right, but later said that assumption was because she had a hearing problem in her left ear. Well, we think the AR-15 shot came from her right. We also think that even though this shot originated from her left, it caused a noise that would have come from her right, as we'll see in a moment. Then again, perhaps it was her left side hearing problem that caused her to miss the first shot, which came from her left, the forehead shot. Or perhaps it was just her excitement at the prospect of seeing the president, and especially Jackie Kennedy, that caused her to miss the moonwalking bears. When we carefully look at various witness accounts, we see that most witnesses reported 3 shots, but they didn't report the same 3 shots. If we put together the approximate limousine positions described by witnesses at the time of a shot, we end up with 5 locations, which is interesting for a number of reasons. First, because there was a small minority of witnesses who reported 5 shots. J.C. Price on top of the Terminal Annex building was one such witness. He thought he heard a volley of 5 shots. And Jean Hill, who was standing next to her friend Mary Mormon, famously heard 4 to 6 shots. And then there's the 5 acoustical impulses, which we'll talk about next time. Again, the number of witnesses who reported 5 shots is even smaller than the number who reported 4. But the same reasons we gave last time for under-reporting the number of shots still hold. But we want to return to Mary Woodward Pillsworth for a moment because she said something else that was interesting.
There was one shot, and I have always believed it didn't hit anybody, and I think a lot of research has shown I'm probably right on this, because I couldn't see anything happen, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and we were saying, is it, we thought it was somebody backfiring a car, or fireworks or something, but then the next 2 shots came very, very rapidly. The sound of one didn't kind of fade away before the second shot came, and that's when the second shot I saw really what happened.
In fact, she has been consistent about that. She did say, right from the start, that she believed no one in the limousine was hit by this shot, which she believed was the first shot, as her article in the next day's paper reported. We don't believe it hit anyone in the limousine either. We don't believe this was the shot that hit Governor Connolly. We don't believe it was the one that caused James Tagg's minor wound either. We do believe that this shot sounded different from the others, not as loud perhaps, especially to bystanders who weren't too close to the source. We also believe this is the shot that accounts for the other victim of the assassination, and a wound we haven't mentioned yet. In addition to Kennedy, Connolly, and Tagg, there was a fourth victim of the assassination. But the fourth victim wasn't a person. The fourth victim was the limousine. We already mentioned a minor dent to the chrome strip, but there was another point of damage, specifically the windshield. There was a bullet hole in the windshield.
On the morning of November the 22nd, 1963, I was a second-year medical student at Southwestern Medical University in Dallas, Texas. We ran around the side of the building to the emergency room exit, and the presidential limousine was there. Had been standing there for some time just watching the back of the emergency room when I realized that there was a bullet hole in the windshield. Talked to my friend next to me and said, "Look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield," and pointed it out to them. At the time, I did not know any of the details of the shooting. I was quite shocked when I looked up and saw the bullet hole, but it was very clear. It was a through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back.
Dr. Glanges wasn't the only person to see this bullet hole in the windshield. St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter Richard Dudman, along with another man who preferred to remain anonymous, saw the limousine at Parkland Hospital and saw the hole. DPD motorcycle officer Stavis Ellis and his fellow motorcycle officer H.R. Freeman were other witnesses to the hole. The U.S. Park Police works with the Secret Service to protect the White House, and is probably the organization George Hickey belonged to before joining the Secret Service. The Park Police was most recently in the news for clearing Lafayette Square of Black Lives Matter protesters prior to a Trump photo op. Nick Principe, who was a member of the White House Park Police, saw the limousine in the White House garage after William Greer told him that one bullet came right through the windshield. Principe then saw the hole for himself. Secret Service agent Joe Paella was assigned to guard the limousine the night after the assassination. He saw the hole.
So, I was still en route to Atoka, and I got a call from the Secret Service office that to turn around and go back to the White House, that the car that he was killed in was being flown back to the White House, and they wanted me to guard it until the doctors from Bethesda Naval Hospital showed up, and there was still some brain tissue and bone and things like that in the car. So I went back there, drove back there, and started to check out the vehicle. And as I was waiting there, and it took a while to get there, and I was, walking around the car. I didn't want to sit back there. It was pretty horrible. I noticed that there appeared to be a bullet hole in the windshield on the driver's side. A couple of inches, over the hood of the car, several inches.
The Ford Motor Company, which actually owned the limousine and only leased it to the U.S. government, decided to display the limo in their museum once the government no longer had use for it. The actual return to the museum didn't happen until 1977. But in the days following the assassination, it was returned to Dearborn, Michigan for refurbishing. Local newspaper reporters misunderstood the reason for the limousine to be taken to Dearborn as transfer to the museum. Their December 3rd and 4th, 1963 articles mentioned the hole. Secret Service agent Charles Taylor Jr., not to be confused with Warren Taylor, saw the limousine in the cargo plane as it headed back to Washington. He wrote a report that mentioned the hole. Of course, he backtracked that statement sometime later when he saw a windshield in the archives that had a crack, not a hole. He decided, after seeing the cracked windshield, that windshield did not have a hole. Dissemblance again. That windshield, which was a substitute windshield, didn't have a hole, but the original windshield did. Assassination researcher Doug Weldon studied the windshield hole and especially the chain of custody issues surrounding it. There's a brief glitch in this clip in which the name Stavis Ellis gets cut out.
Former Dallas police officer H.R. Freeman, who was in the motorcade, was interviewed by Gil Toth in 1971 about how he observed the limousine at Parkland Hospital immediately after the shooting. He said, "I was right beside it, and I've got this interview on tape. I could have touched it. It was a bullet hole. You could tell what it was." Dallas police officer Stavis, who was in charge of the motorcade escort to Dallas, observed in later interviews to reporters and radio stations, "You could have put a pencil through the hole." In fact, he did, he told me. With extensive interviews with myself, I talk to Stavis Ellis almost every other week, one of the most honest people. He will not, like the guy from Ford, he will not tell me what I want to hear. Very candid. Is unequivocal about the hole. As he recalls these years later, he thought the hole was a little bit lower in the windshield, but he is absolutely certain of its existence. And I'm going to show you it couldn't have been lower. That recollection has to be wrong.
Well, the windshield hole could have been lower if one was not trying to connect it with Kennedy's throat wound. In that case, the hole could have been anywhere.
He did describe the hole as being on the driver's side of the rearview mirror, which is consistent with other observations in the photographic evidence, which you're going to see. He told me he actually did put a pencil in the hole. He said there were numerous people and police officers at Parkland Hospital who viewed the hole. He vividly remembers that while he was observing the hole, and this story goes, it's not new to me. This goes back years and years and years he's told this. While he was observing the hole, a Secret Service agent came up to him and tried to persuade him that he was seeing a fragment, not a hole. Police officer Stavis Ellis noted, it wasn't a damn fragment, it was a hole.
Among other things, Weldon pointed out the many inconsistencies in the various records about the location and custody of the limousine and the original windshield following the assassination. Weldon also discovered that after the assassination, the Secret Service had ordered 21 replacement windshields for, quote, target practice, end quote. The original windshield appears to have been scrapped or destroyed on November 25, 1963, in Dearborn, Michigan. The picture of the windshield in the commission exhibits shows a cracked windshield, not one with a through-and-through hole. There are 3 pictures that assassination researchers investigating the hole typically look at to study its location in the windshield. One is the Altgens 6. Many researchers point to this odd area, dubbed the Spiral Nebula, as evidence of the hole. While we agree that this area is certainly odd, it isn't necessarily a bullet hole. Note its location, just above the corner of the rearview mirror from Altgens' perspective, and there are no crack lines. We believe there was some retouching of the Altgens 6 photo before Walter Cronkite showed a cropped and blurry version of it at about 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Perhaps, among other things, giving time to clean up the forehead wound for public consumption. Altgens' next photograph, number 7, shows a white spot that appears to be well to the side of the rearview mirror. This Parkland Hospital photograph is the third one most researchers look at. It seems to have a white spot in this general area also, as part of the streak of light going across, although there is no empty area within that spot. But these areas are either nebulous or filled in with white. They don't look like through and through holes. These two, at least, look more like the crack of the official story. And we don't rule out photographic alteration. In a close look at Altgens 7, for example, that area of the windshield crack looks as if it is contained within a square. Importantly, witnesses to the hole described it as being lower, near the bottom of the windshield. Stavis Ellis said that the hole was to the right of the driver, near the bottom of the glass. Unfortunately, right and left can often be interchangeable in witness accounts. Right-left confusion is why surgeons now physically mark the side of the patient before they operate, lest they remove the wrong kidney, for example. We don't often know whether witnesses were describing right and left from their perspective facing the object, or right and left from the object's perspective. In this case, we think Stavis Ellis was describing the hole as being to the driver's right towards the midline of the car. But top and bottom are less likely to be confused. Stavis Ellis's description of somewhere near the bottom of the glass seems clear enough. Nick Principe said it was low on the passenger side. Well, passenger side is more helpful than right or left, but here we do think that Principe mixed up driver versus passenger side, or right and left, because other witnesses seemed to indicate that it was more to the driver's side of center. But again, it's a little harder to mix up high versus low, and witnesses were consistent about there only being one hole and consistent about it being low in the windshield. Joe Pagliella said that the hole was a few inches above the hood.
A bullet hole in the windshield on the driver's side, a couple of inches, over the hood of the car, several inches.
So we went looking at that area, and this is what we found. In Altgens 6, there's a place where Jackie's glove shows through, and it sure looks like a hole to us. In Altgens 7, that area is blocked by flowers and whatnot, but we'll give you another photograph or two to make up for that one. In the Parkland Hospital picture, there's this area. This area is certainly interesting. In the AP Stemmons Freeway picture by Al Volkand, there's this area. And then there's this very interesting FBI picture dated 11/23/63. No visible crack up high. But wait, is that a pencil through the windshield hole? Notice that this area is framed near the approximate center of the picture and is where the light seems to be focused. So that's our candidate location for the bullet hole. It's a wonder driver Bill Greer wasn't hit. It must have just missed him. Or maybe it had lost enough of its energy by that point that it didn't penetrate anything after the windshield. But for a bullet to have been fired at Kennedy through the windshield to, say, the throat wound location, from even the crack location high in the windshield, the shooter would have had to be almost directly in front of the limousine and at a low elevation, which is one reason why some researchers have proposed a shooter on top of the triple underpass. However, for a trajectory through the bottom of the windshield to Kennedy's throat, a shooter would have been firing low in the road and shooting upward, and probably firing through the hood of the car to boot. We don't think that the bullet that made this hole struck anyone, although it may have come really close to hitting driver William Greer. Can we determine the direction of travel of the projectile that caused the hole? According to witnesses, the hole showed beveling on the inside of the windshield, meaning that the projectile that caused it came from the front. This image is meant to show beveling in bone, but it also works for glass. George Whitaker of the Ford Motor Company described the beveling of the hole as showing that the projectile came from the front. But this shot wasn't fired from the front of the limousine. Huh? To understand that, we'll turn to someone who saw the other Zapruder film.
There's also been some discussion by people and some idea that perhaps one of the bullets fired struck the Stemmons Freeway sign, which of course turned up missing and nobody's ever seen it again. Was there any information that you haven't seen anything in the film that confirm or deny that?
Yeah, because Graham missed his turn, one of the shot hit the Stemmons sign. And
you could see it on the film?
Yeah, you can see something, I don't know the right word, something on the...
Ricocheting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. On the sign.
Something flew off of the sign?
Yeah, flew off of the sign, yeah.
Interesting.
That poof off the sign. Mars even used the word ricochet to paraphrase what Raymond described. We believe the bullet that caused the windshield hole came from a ricochet off the Stemmons sign. Interestingly, although we never saw this poof off the sign in any of our go-to sources for Zapruder film images that we normally use, we did find this one relatively obscure version of the film that had a single frame image of the poof. We don't know about the YouTube poster's source for this version of the film, but this one frame is extremely interesting. But for an assassin to have missed the limousine completely and hit the Stemmons sign, that assassin would have to have been a really bad shot. But suppose it wasn't a miss. Suppose it wasn't an accident. Suppose the sign was exactly what the shooter intended to hit. Because there's something going on in Altgens 6 itself, something that gives us another clue as to where the shot that was near simultaneous with the photograph originated from. Secret Service agent Warren Taylor's arm looks like a broomstick that is melting through the car window. It looks as though an attempt was made to hide his hand via a drop of emulsion. Some researchers have described Taylor as holding a, quote, phantom revolver. They have speculated that he fired a distraction shot or a signal to begin the assassination based on Lyndon Johnson's orders. We disagree. The reason why has to do with the state of Secret Service communications in 1963. Gerald Blaine explains.
Tell us, what was it like being an agent back in 1963? We all see the agents now, and they've got earpieces and all kinds of fancy devices. What was it like for you guys being on the Kennedy detail?
We were pre-technology. There were 34 agents on the White House detail, and we had minimal equipment to work with. In fact, we had no radios. We operated by hand signals, and our computer indexing system consisted of 3x5 cards with the picture and the threat on the back. And so we would memorize all those individuals, plus we were given pretty good instructions on what to expect in a crowd as far as mentally ill people or people who were sociopaths and so forth. So we wore sunglasses because if you happened to see one of the individuals, you could follow them without turning your head and keep track of it. If you felt that there was something wrong, You could give a signal like banging on the side of the car or giving a motion, and that's the way we handled it.
Suppose an agent was trying to get the attention of his fellow agents 2 cars ahead to alert them that there was a problem, to alert agents who were a little slow, a little tired, a little hungover, over the crowd and the motorcycle noises. Banging on the hood of the car isn't going to cut it. But a gunshot? That might work to get their attention. We think the shot was a revolver shot fired by one of Johnson's follow-up car agents, Warren Taylor, or perhaps one of the agents on the other side of the car, Jerry Kivett or Lem Johns, especially since there's an open door we can see on that side of the car in Altgens 6. Also confirmed by James Crawford, who was standing here, and whose Warren Commission testimony mentioned the open doors of the Vice President's follow-up car. With a bit of work, we were able to determine that the frame with the poof was number 186. Here are a couple of other versions of that same frame. In the Warren Commission version, there's no poof, just a very dark sign. The Lightbox version also has no poof, but has a much lighter sign. However, there is something very interesting in the frame immediately after 186 in the sprocket area, which shows the VP follow-up car. The YouTube version, of course, doesn't show the sprocket area since, like the purportedly recovered 207 to 212 frames with the missing hickey, it's supposedly from a copy that didn't have the sprocket area. For the frame 187 comparison, the frame after the YouTube poof, we've added the Costello source image. In these images, we're looking at Warren Taylor's window in the sprocket area. They're all slightly different, even though it's supposed to be the same frame. But in the Lightbox version especially, that looks like a gun to us. In this image, the gun doesn't seem to be pointed towards the sign, and the VP follow-up car might or might not be in the Altgens 6 position yet. But remember that the altered Zapruder film, which includes this frame, had as its source material for its fabricated images bits from other frames from the original film. We think that the Vice President's protective agents saw the schoolbook depository shooter taking aim even before the first shot was fired. Being farther back, they had a better view of the window and didn't have to crane their necks to see it. But it took a couple of seconds or more to get their guns in hand and or find a good target. Then the car turned onto Elm, and the Stemmons sign became the best apparent target for a warning shot. In fact, a warning shot may have been fired even before the first depository shot was fired, but we'll save that story for another time. Our Altgens 6 Secret Service shooter from the VP follow-up car clears up yet another mystery that has puzzled researchers over the years. Because the tree that might have interfered with a shot from the Texas Schoolbook Depository at the point of the Altgens 6 photograph turns out to be irrelevant. Now, we don't think the ricochet off the metal 1963 era sign necessarily left a hole in its wake, but it may have left some sort of mark on the sign. We went looking for images of the front of the Stemmons sign, but couldn't really find anything conclusive. Low resolution and distance from the sign were common problems. However, we did find some interesting images, like these 2 little white spots in this picture. We don't know that the date on the picture is accurate, but those 2 white spots appear to be on either side of an outline of the supporting pole on the back of the sign. Reinforcement rivets, perhaps? Then there's the nun picture, which doesn't seem to have the white spots, But there does seem to be a very interesting spot under the N, which might be in the other picture. And that spot under the N might correspond with the poof from the YouTube film image. Not conclusive, perhaps, but interesting. We do know that the sign was at least moved, and probably replaced, at some point after the assassination and before Dealey Plaza groundskeeper Emmett Hudson gave his Warren Commission testimony. Some researchers have suggested it wasn't moved until after the May 1964 FBI reenactment, but we think it was actually moved before the December 1963 Secret Service reenactment. Here's why. When Emmett Hudson told the Commission that the signs had been moved, it seemed to explain discrepancies between what was purported to be an assassination photograph and a photograph from the Secret Service reenactment, which happened in early December 1963. The discrepancies explained by the moving of the signs seemed related to two photographs. The one on the left was a picture attributed to Phil Willis. Remember, it was his daughter Linda who asserted that trains had been edited out of one of his photographs, so we don't trust the image to be entirely authentic. And the one on the right is from the album of Secret Service reenactment pictures. It's not entirely clear that this is picture 18 mentioned in Hudson's testimony, but it is the 18th page of pictures in the album, not counting the pictures of the equipment used during the reenactment and assuming that the scope view and the camera view are considered the same picture. At any rate, picture 18, as it was called, was not given as a separate Hudson exhibit, and this one is what makes the most sense to us. The discrepancy seems to be the location of the Stemmons sign. In the Willis photograph, the Stemmons sign seems closer to the camera than the lamppost, while in the reenactment image, it seems further away. So we would hazard to guess that the sign was moved before the Secret Service reenactment. And since Hudson was the groundskeeper, he would have been in the best position to know whether the sign had been moved and when it had been moved. But of course, he was never asked about the when. Some researchers have suggested that the Stemmons sign was moved to make an accurate reconstruction of events, with sight lines to the sign and so forth, impossible. They may be correct. But we point out that the Stemmons sign may also have been replaced at the same time that it was moved, in order to hide the ricochet mark. The Elm Street signs were subsequently removed entirely in 1965 to be replaced with the overhead signs that exist to this day. Our fifth shot, while actually occurring near the beginning of the assassination sequence, simultaneous with the Altgens 6 photograph, was a Secret Service warning shot aimed at the sign as the safest target our Secret Service shooter could quickly find. But then the bullet bounced back and penetrated the windshield of the car of the president their agency was supposed to protect. Oops, better cover that up along with the AR-15 accident. We believe that the bullet from this shot was later found inside the limousine. It was described by another one of Kennedy's personal physicians, Dr. James Young, who attended at least part of the autopsy. Dr. Young was interviewed for a Navy magazine and described events from his contemporaneous notes, which he wrote to himself and saved in a safety deposit box. Dr. Humes had sent a couple of Navy corpsmen to search the limousine. They returned with some pieces of skull and a deformed brass slug that they had found inside the car. Just a point of clarification. Dr. Young mistakenly called the limousine the Queen Mary in his interview. The Queen Mary was actually the nickname for the Secret Service follow-up car. The president's limousine was called the X-100. But importantly, at some point before his interview with the Navy writers, Dr. Young had double-checked his notes with one of the Navy corpsmen who had actually found the bullet in the limousine and who confirmed for Dr. Young everything in his notes. Dr. Young says deformed. He says bent, but he doesn't describe any other damage. Dr. Young's bullet has to be the same bullet that Admiral David P. Osborne saw during the autopsy and held in his hand. Osborne thought it might have been brought into the morgue, although he mistakenly thought it came from Parkland Hospital, and described it to David Lifton. Osborne told Lifton that the bullet was not bloody, that it was reasonably clean, and, here's where he differs somewhat from Dr. Young, that it was not deformed, by which he may have meant that it was intact rather than fragmented. So Admiral Osborne's bullet may have been only slightly distorted, only slightly bent, but still the same bullet as Dr. Young's. Osborne initially seemed to think that this slug had fallen out of the president's clothes or body, but elsewhere amended that, saying perhaps it had been brought into the morgue separately from the body, maybe from Parkland Hospital. His speculation that it had been brought in from Parkland Hospital might have been based on later knowledge that a bullet had been found on a Parkland Hospital stretcher. But the chain of custody for that bullet, shaky as it was, did not include the Bethesda morgue. Admiral Osborne was absolutely certain that the bullet was in the morgue that night, and asserted that he held it in his hand, despite the Warren Commission's inference that his memory of seeing the bullet might have been mistaken. He saw it. He held it. His memory of where this bullet came from, however, was less certain. We think Admiral Osborne was confusing two separate specimens, Custer's king-size fragment that fell out of the back wound and the intact bullet that was brought into the morgue separately from the body. We think Admiral Osborne's bullet may have been only somewhat distorted, only somewhat bent, but still the same bent but otherwise intact bullet as Dr. Young's, a bullet that was brought into the morgue during the autopsy. David Lifton contacted the commander of the Bethesda Naval Hospital, Captain James Stover, who confirmed that a bullet had been brought into the morgue in a brown paper envelope, just like the one Dr. Young described. We really don't think that two separate intact bullets were brought into the autopsy. There are no witnesses to two intact bullets being brought into the autopsy. It's much more likely that these accounts corroborate the same piece of evidence, despite the slightly different descriptions of what might have been a slightly bent but otherwise intact, relatively clean, bloodless bullet. Then there's this receipt for missile, with the word missile misspelled, that Captain Stover signed. The word missile implies an intact bullet rather than a couple of fragments, as has been attributed to this receipt. But there's another word that's drawn our attention. Many researchers assume that it is the word removed with a typographical error. But that third letter is a C. It might have been intended to say recovered. This receipt doesn't specify from where the missile was removed or recovered. We think this was a receipt for a somewhat bent but otherwise intact bullet recovered by Dr. Humes based on his orders for two of his corpsmen to search the limousine. That it was the same bullet that Admiral Osborne saw and held in his hand. The same bullet that Captain Stover saw arrive in a brown envelope, and the same bullet that Dr. Young described to his Navy journalists. And this was fired by a Secret Service agent from the vice president's follow-up car. So here's our accounting of the bullet evidence related to the assassination. Note that this is not the same as any official accounting, but it reflects our educated speculation based on the witness statements we've presented here and elsewhere. The fragmented forehead bullet accounts for Custer's king-size fragment, the nose and tail limo fragments, and the small fragments found inside Kennedy's head. The Secret Service warning shot accounts for the intact, albeit slightly bent, relatively clean, bloodless bullet that the Navy corpsman found in the limousine and brought into the morgue in a paper envelope. The Connolly bullet fragmented. One piece fell to the floor and was picked up by a nurse, as Connolly described in his book. Other pieces were recovered during his surgery, given to the Dallas Police Department and thence to the FBI. It subsequently disappeared from the evidence completely. Robert Harris gives an excellent history of this bullet in his essay, The Connolly Bullet. The AR-15 bullet was the Parkland Hospital stretcher bullet found by Parkland employee Daryl Tomlinson and seen by head of security O.P. Wright. There's a story surrounding that bullet and whose stretcher it was found on, which we'll save for another time. But the pristine Carcano bullet that became Commission Exhibit 399 was a substitution for the original pointed, relatively pristine AR-15 bullet, which was found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital. The bullet that hit the curb on Main Street and caused James Tagg's minor wounds, as far as we know, was never recovered. Given that the handgun shot would not have been as loud as the rifle shots, it may have fooled witnesses into thinking it was an echo. The bang off the Stemmons sign could have confused witnesses into thinking the shot had come from that direction, from in front of the limousine or up from the knoll, before the AR-15 shot also gave that impression. So that's our 5-shot scenario. The witnesses who reported 3 shots either missed some of the shots, especially the earlier shots, because their attention was elsewhere, or they misinterpreted a shot or shots as motorcycle backfire or firecrackers, or misinterpreted separate shots as a shot plus an echo, or did not count the Secret Service shots among the assassination shots. Because even though most witnesses reported 3 shots, they didn't report the same 3 shots. If we put them together, we get 5 shots. And by an odd coincidence, or rather, not a coincidence at all, 5 suspect impulses that met acoustical experts' criteria for gunshot noises is what the acoustical experts who studied the dictabelt evidence for the HSCA found. We'll explore the relationship between the motorcycle officer who had the bike with the mic and the so-called knoll rider in our next episode. Part 9, The Acoustics.